Hello and welcome to Getting Lost with me and my good friend.
Dan, who is completely lost about Lost.
Well, first of all, what did you make of that opening? What, 10 minutes or so? Like the very literally just Jack waking up and then
Oh,
the
right,
crash on
okay,
the
yeah.
beach.
So, yeah, because I remember that the intro is literally, it's got it was a title card of just Lost,
Yeah,
and then a man lost in the woods. That was the kind of sort of thing that you sort of got. And you got this sort of slightly weird almost transition because he's on his own and then wanders around and then suddenly just finds carnage in terms of the plane crash and go on. And it was quite a nice way of kind of building it up. So you've got the sort of, okay, the title's called Lost. Here is our, what we assume is the protagonist, lead person, and he's in the middle of a woods. And I think he sees a dog, doesn't he? Which is the dog of one of the characters we meet later, which is just a little bit weird. And then he sort of wanders around a bit, and then just you sort of go, oh, okay. So there's been a plane crash, and it sort of nicely introduces, okay, this is how he's got into that situation type thing. And the fact that he's literally on his own at the beginning again puts across the notion, oh, this is going to be our hero, our lead guy, and he sort of wanders around, and pretty much immediately is sort of the hero character in that he's got someone he has to go and drag out from underneath a piece of wreckage straight away. He's immediately sort of barking orders at people. Oh, you do this, help here. And there's some sort of classic things where they sort of emphasize the sort of danger in various bits. Like if there's a guy who randomly gets sucked into an aircraft engine and just blows up. I'm not quite sure how an aircraft engine is literally standing on its own, is just continually running, but okay. You know, so, and you've got the sort of, oh, there's the pregnant woman that has to be dealt with. There's the person with the injuries to the legs that has to be dealt with. You've got the guy who, again, I don't remember his name, but the sort of incompetent lifeguard who can't do CPR. He has to sort of step in and deal with that. It throws in a little bit of sort of slight humor when he's like, oh yeah, just go and get me a pen. And he comes back with 20 pens, an hour later, it appears. But yeah, I think it did a good job of, it sets the scene in terms of what's happened without telling you what's happened. It doesn't use exposition or anything like that. It's just you immediately go, right.
They're all the crazy plane crash.
Yeah, they're in a plane crash. It looks kind of like a sort of classic desert island type, well, not desert island, but island type thing, because you've got the woods, but it's the fact that it's on a beach. I think the fact it's on a beach immediately implies, oh, it's an island somewhere type thing. And I don't think you're initially at that point aware exactly where they are in terms of the geography of things, because you sort of get a bit of exposition towards the end of the episode, of the first half of the pilot, where they run into the pilot. Yeah.
I just think that opening stage, it's been a while since I've seen it, so impressively staged. Just it's so kind of initially disorientating when he runs onto the beach and there's just noise and screaming, and I think the camera starts kind of cutting around quite quickly, so it's just kind of builds that kind of sense of what's happening. What I didn't realize, reading some trivia, was they actually disassembled a real plane.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
To use as the kind of props for the set.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, a lot of money will have gone into that opening, or that opening set, as it were. Particularly with all of the explosions and bits and pieces that they sort of have going on.
Yeah, because it was, I think the pilot cost somewhere between $10 and $14 million.
Okay. Yeah.
Just for the pilot.
But, yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, because there was obviously the big aircraft, at least two things exploding. So I'm pretty sure there's an engine explodes, and then a bit later a wing drops off, nearly crushing someone, and that explodes. Yeah. And there's just a lot of characters as well, and there's a lot of, well, there is a higher than normal number of speaking roles that you encounter relatively quickly.
The main focus on the pilot is definitely Jack and Kate, and I think it's quite interesting because it hints at some of the things that are going to develop in their characters as individuals in that pilot. So I think it's interesting to hear what you kind of make of them as kind of somebody who doesn't know like their trajectories, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So
Like, what do you make of them from the initial
yeah, I mean,
introductions to them?
I would expand it slightly and say that, like, from my point of view, there was three main characters. I mean, the other one was Charlie,
Yes.
and that's just because those three characters were the ones where you had the sort of flashbacks to the bit on the plane for, and Jack's character was, in some ways kind of a bit stereotypical in terms of the sort of action leader type person. But with like a few little, call them nuances, as it were, because like one of the things that was noticeable and was like at one point I thought, oh, that's a bit weird, is that he constantly wants to effectively be alone.
Yep.
So like he starts off completely on his own, away from everyone else, and everyone else seems to all be in the same place. And so there's that sort of, oh, well, how's he ended up there rather than with the rest of the group type thing. Then once he's done his initial sort of hero saving bits, he then sort of goes off on his own to sort of treat his own wound, which he can't even do on his own. And it's only when Kate comes and finds him that he actually gets the help her to actually sew himself up. I think that's like, really why have you wandered off on your own? You've got your sewing kit and you have bits and pieces. Why have you gone off completely separate to the rest of the group to try and sort of stitch yourself up, which seems like maybe you want to sort of have someone else around there. And then when it's sort of the quest to go and find the cockpit, it's like, oh, I'll go on my own. And he sort of only reluctantly takes Kate and Charlie along with him. And he constantly seems to be sort of just trying to get a little bit separate, despite the fact he's sort of the de facto leader, even in those sort of first bits and pieces. It's also got, I wasn't sure exactly what it was implying, but there's sort of some kind of hint to do with like the alcohol stuff, because he gets he wants the strong drink on the plane, and he's got the spare bottle of vodka, I think it is, in his pocket type thing. And I wasn't really sure, I guess we'll figure out whether or not that's, oh, he's got an alcohol problem or he's got some other issue that he's working through type thing. But yeah, it all sort of, you've got this sort of, it's not quite a stereotype, but it's like it's the doctor / surgeon who's possibly got a drinking problems. And Kate's sort of a bit of an enigma, because I mean, Kate's character, I think, suffers a little bit from almost immediately going gooey eyes at Jack, sort of within about half an hour of meeting him type thing, where he's like,
I think, that's really interesting to me. Like her first scene is almost completely different to her throughout the rest of like, the pilot, and then as the show kind of develops, you kind of it becomes clearer which version of her is the more real.
Right. Yeah. And there's, because it's got the sort of slight, it tries to do the sort of twist thing in the pilot whereby she turns out to be the prisoner of the marshal, which you only find out right at the end when he sort of wakes up and goes, oh, where is she? And then you get the flashback show, oh, she's the one who was in handcuffs, it wasn't one of the other ones type thing. So there's that mysterious bit about it. But yeah, you've got that sort of contrast in that when she first appears, she's like kind of squeamish about the blood and the sort of helping stitch him up. But then she's quite strong in virtually every other scene that she's in.
I think one of the other interesting things about her in the pilot definitely is, they get it very much in the second half of the pilot, is you have the marshal wake up and sort of shout, where is she, kind of implying that she's very dangerous almost.
Yeah, so on and so forth. And then she sort of you've got that sort of interesting bit where, I can't remember what you said the guy was, but the sort of southern redneck guy who takes the gun off the marshal.
Yes.
She sort of breaks up the sort of face off with him and takes the gun. And of course that means she's the one who has the gun at the end of play of that episode. So
I think it's actually quite interesting what she does at she takes the gun.
Oh, but she takes it apart.
She takes it apart. She gives one part to Sawyer and she gives one part to Saeed.
Yeah.
So she very deliberately gives like the gun parts to the two men who've been fighting each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's I've forgotten about that. But yeah, that's a sort of that was an interesting way of dealing with the situation, as it's a sort of, you two hate each other, but basically, if we encounter something again, you're going to have to work together. But it's an interesting potential future dynamic that you've got there, because that was one of the things I was thinking. It's like you've got an awful lot of things going on in that you've got a survival situation, you've got basically you've got the obstacles that prevent an easy rescue, with which you discover from the pilot that we turned around after 6 hours, so we're like literally thousands of miles away from where we should be. When we've crashed. You've obviously got the conflict between the group already sort of going on, because everyone's sort of dealing with it in their own way. And you've got the Sawyer versus the guy who's in the Republican Guard, who I've forgotten the name of.
Saeed, yeah.
Saeed, yeah. So Sawyer and Saeed already sort of coming to blows. You've got the two who don't speak the same language as anyone else, so they can't communicate. So you've got all these conflict bits. Nice little point of conflict sort of coming up there. So yeah, that's the sort of some of the other characters, like at the moment, seem a little bit two-dimensional, but that's because they just haven't had enough screen time. Like Charlie, like oh look, there's a drug addict, yay! It's like that's going to be is a point of conflict that's going to exist there. The strange chap who sort of really enjoys the rain and sort of
yeah. Locke, who I don't think he's even named in the pilot.
Right, yeah. It was only there was enough in the sort of pilot episode that you go, there's a lot of good characters to play with here.
And then I think on top of the characters, then obviously you have all the kind of crazy other stuff going on, hooks. So I think I wrote down a quick list, like as I was sort of rewatching it. So I think just in the pilot, the kind of mysteries, which is what Lost obviously became quite known in the zeitgeist for establishing its mysteries. So I think just in the pilot, you obviously have the cause of the crash.
Yeah, because it just, I mean, you kind of see, you get the flashbacks where just sort of, the masts come down and then it seems to fall down. And then you've got a little bit more in terms of, the radio went out hours before type thing. So there's definitely something weird going on in terms of that. Then
obviously sort of connected to that, you've got, well, where is the rest of the plane? They're in the midsection, they find the cockpit, but where's the rest?
Right, yes. Yeah, no. So, that's something I hadn't picked up on. Okay. Yeah, because they've got the sort of, I don't know, 30 or so of them, maybe.
Yes, I think they say at one point, I think there's 40 odd survivors. I think Jack mentions to the pilot.
Just sort of eyeballing it. But yeah, I hadn't really cottoned on that, there's other bits of the plane that they haven't found. And then you've got all the sort of some like a mixture of like mysterious goings on and sort of conventional goings on the island. So you've got the crazy weather that seems like occasionally hits, and that's like, well, is that weird or is that just like tropical weather?
Yeah, well, is it just tropical weather? Yeah, I think it's they definitely film it in a way to put across the idea that it's weird and that it comes out of nowhere and then stops out of nowhere.
Yeah. And there's like the bit sort of when it first gets dark, and then you sort of hear this mysterious stuff going on elsewhere in the island, which again you're not really sure. You're not given anything as a hint as what it is, and it's like a mixture of noises. And one of the things that I was like, okay, is that all the noise they're hearing, or is there like some background music also going on? Because there's like almost like a background noise, and I was like, is that just the sound effect, or is that actually
because
characters hearing type thing? So
there's quite it's almost like an Inception like bit of music on the soundtrack at that point, where they kind of warm.
It's a sort of warm, and I'm like, is that what they're hearing, or is that just sort of adding to the mysteriousness in terms of how it's being presented?
So you have the mystery of what it is, what is out in the trees, what is it that takes the pilot. Because
you've got the pilot that just gets literally savaged and put up in the tree, and then there's the sort of slight possible explanation, but isn't an explanation, when they run into the polar bear. Why is a polar bear? That seems a bit wacky, but and it's like, it almost makes it more mysterious because you've got this possible explanation that doesn't really fit type thing into it, and a possible explanation is weird anyway.
I don't know whether this is perhaps giving some kind of spoiler, but it's not really. But the one interesting thing to notice about the bear is I think it's the scene before where Walt is looking in the comic book. One of the pages has a polar bear on it.
Okay, right.
And then there's a polar bear in the next scene. So that's something to look out for. That kind of I guess, foreshadowing of things that cropped up in a number
Right.
of different places.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, I think those are the. Then obviously you've got the other main mystery is right at the end of the French message.
Oh yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why has it been repeating for 16 years?
Yeah.
What is it that's killed these people? How have those people ended up on that island?
Yeah. It sort of introduces it stops them from transmitting, which obviously makes their situation worse, and then you've got this introduction of, well, what's going on here, and that's an interesting bit as well, because I mean, one of the things that they sort of introduce early, and that's a good example of it, is the sort of mixture of skills that sort of people have. Like it's very much sort of setting up as, everyone needs to work together because so yeah, there's definitely a whole bunch of sort of mysteries in terms of what it's set up to do, in terms of like, come and watch more episodes, try and figure out what's going on type thing.
Yeah, they do drop in quite a few
Right. Yeah.
kind of threads. But I think that as well as like obviously the big obvious mysteries, what I didn't realize they put in the pilot, or sort of didn't remember they put in the pilot, was a lot of the kind of character stuff that becomes important, because although like the show is, or it's most famous because of like its crazy mystery kind of element, but I actually think a lot of the kind of character work in it is really strong, and a lot of it is about the characters kind of changing and growing,
right, yeah,
and developing because of the situation they've been thrown into. So it's quite interesting to see that they kind of set a lot of the stuff with Jin and Sun, like the two Korean characters. We kind of, well, like you said, they're kind of set apart from everybody else, but you also get that little element of clearly, like, he's very overbearing to her.
Yeah.
Like I say, Locke is really intriguing in the pilot, even though he doesn't speak. He was the guy who sat on the brain.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So the only lines he has in the pilot is when he's talking to Walt about backgammon.
Yes, yeah, oh yes, he's got that where he's sort of.
And that is, and thinking about that now in the pilot, that's another it's a massive thing for the rest of the show that they set up there in that little bit of interaction. But it's just like, it's so easy to overlook it. But yeah, that's what I really liked about it. Going back to the pilot, is the way they have dropped in ththese random little things. Was there? I think it's only fair to ask were the parts of it you didn't like, or parts of it where you lost it, your attention drifted, or?
No, I mean, I don't think so. In that you always add something. It's a classic. There was always something driving the sort of plot along in terms of what they had to do next. I mean, it's a sort of thing that my assumption is that they won't keep that up. But that's kind of what you want I think in a pilot. Like if you as a thing that if you just want going in cold, you go, oh, it's keeping you interest throughout the whole thing, while at the same time introducing the sort of key characters and some of the key, what I assume are some of the key mysteries that are sort of coming up. So you go, okay, yeah, I want to find out more about that.
And that was week 1 of Getting Lost. Join us next time for Beachside Surgery.